I called him nothing, but it was very important what I said right after that.
Welcome to the SciPhi Show, where we talk science and philosophy, usually with just my two favorite atheist thinkers, Alex Malpass and Dan Linford. But today we also have a special guest. Danny PhilTalk has gone viral with his recent takedown of Jordan Peterson.
You're really quite something, you are.
Aren't I? But you're really quite nothing, right? You're not a Christian.
Okay, I'm done with him.
He was busy talking to Piers Morgan or something. Fortunately, we found a 19-year-old kid in my neighbor's basement with a skateboard in one hand and a bong in the other. And I said, you are going to be perfect for this philosophy podcast that I do. So come along on the show. No, I'm just kidding. You are the actual Danny PhilTalk, right?
Yes. And so I'm so happy to be on here. I know you guys and I'm excited to be here.
Well, welcome to the SciPhi Show. Danny, why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself and your channel? What do you do?
I make content on TikTok and YouTube. I have a little bit of a philosophical background too. I studied a little bit in university, but I like to go around and cause havoc amongst Christian apologists. That's kind of like my brand. I don't have anything against Christians. I just have, they're lawyers, right? So that's the kind of what I do. And so I guess that's pretty in line with some of the interest here on the panel. So yeah.
Right. And how did Jubilee come about? Give us the backstory. What was the history behind this event?
Right. So there's a contestant there, one of the 20 atheists named Parker, and Parker and I are friends. When he found out we were doing this, he asked Jubilee, hey, could you invite this guy? I think he'd be good. And so they invited me and I accepted. So that's how I got on the show. But, people also applied and, they go through interviews. I did the interview process to make sure that I wasn't insane. They interviewed me, but they were wrong. I am insane, as you can see in the clip. But so that's a little bit about how I got on.
And are you a skater boy?
No, I can barely ride a bike at the moment. So
right, okay. So look, obviously there's this clip of you confronting Jordan, and it's blown up. It's gone crazy viral. Before we play it, just tell us, how has this affected your life?
Oh, well. I didn't expect it to go as viral as I thought it. So there's our space, right? There's the space, with the Christian apologists, counter apologists, professional philosophers. I thought it would be contained in there, but it got out of our bubble, and that was kind of shocking. So, people have reached out, a lot of positive feedback. A lot of people are not happy about what I did to this, elderly man. So there's been a lot of mostly positive feedback. I would say about 80% was positive, about 20 to 30 is negative. So, seeing everyone react has been very interesting and time consuming and, a little bit overwhelming, but, that's how I'm reacting right now.
Well, let's go straight to the clip. I mean, many people have seen it. If you haven't, stay watching. If not, you can skip forward a minute or two, but here we go. Let's have a look.
Nice to meet you.
What's your name?
Danny.
Danny.
You're saying atheists worship things or people or places, whatever. Can you be very clear about your definition of worship again?
Attend to, prioritize, and sacrifice for.
Okay, that's it. That's your understanding of worship.
Well, I could flesh it out, but that'll do for the time we have.
Okay. Do Catholics attend to Mary?
Yes.
Okay. So do they fit that description of worship?
Yes.
So you would say Catholics and other people that revere Mary, like the Eastern Orthodox tradition, worship Mary.
Well, they might not put her in the highest
But
place.
you would put it that way.
No.
You just said it. Now you're taking it back.
There's still a hierarchy.
Okay, there's a hierarchy, but within
there's something at the top.
All right, you can worship things
Mary
below.
is quite a ways up the hierarchy, but not at the top.
Let's go over your definition of worship again. What's your definition of worship?
Attend to.
Attend to.
Prioritize.
Do Catholics
sacrifice for.
What do Catholics attend to? Do they prioritize Mary over all other human beings?
No, I didn't say overall, did I? I didn't add that to my definition.
You understand.
I said there was a hierarchy as well.
You attend.
So you can attend to something trivially, or you can attend to it deeply.
Okay, and now you're adding stuff to the definition. But your original definition.
I added the hierarchy part at the beginning.
Are you familiar?
Just didn't understand it.
Are you familiar with the Immaculate Conception?
Why is that relevant?
Because you go to a Catholic church, don't you? Or you've attended recently. You're interested in Catholicism, aren't you?
Sure.
All right. Are you familiar with their doctrines?
Somewhat.
Okay. You're
their
familiar.
Doctrines are very
how do
deep.
they regard Mary?
Why are you asking me that?
Because you're a Christian.
You say that. I haven't claimed that.
Oh, what is this? Is this Christians versus atheists?
I don't know.
You don't know where you are right now.
Don't be a smartass.
Well,
and I mean,
either you're a Christian or you're not.
To you if you're a smartass.
Oh, either you're a Christian or you're not. Which one is it?
I could be either of them, but I don't have to tell you.
You don't have to tell me. I was under the impression I was invited to talk to a Christian. Am I not talking to a Christian?
No, you were invited to.
I think everyone should look at the title of the YouTube channel. You're probably in the wrong YouTube video.
You're really quite something, you are.
Aren't I? But you're really quite nothing, right? You're not a Christian.
Okay, I'm done with him.
All right, Danny, that was so entertaining. Did you have fun doing that? What would you say to Jordan Peterson if he was in this panel now? How would you expand the conversation?
I would help him understand why I'm frustrated and why many others are. So and we can start from the backwards, actually. I called him nothing, but it was very important what I said right after that. I said, first of all, it was a quick back to you're really something. But after I said you're nothing, I said, you're not a Christian. What that meant is that you're not bringing any substance to the table, right? Like you're not choosing a side. Like you're not giving me anything, right? Like that was, obviously he has a doctorate degree. Obviously, his books have helped people. And to say that he's nothing quite literally, like he's a worthless human being, that's not what I was saying at all, right? People make arguments about what kinds of effects he's had on society, but I'm not here for that. I don't know much about that. But the point is that he was just kind of dodging my question, not off on the table. So I would help him explain. I would try to get him to understand why we're frustrated, why I was frustrated at that moment.
Just give us the background, because you implied that it was set up as Christians versus a Christian versus atheists. Can you give us a backstory there? Would he have known that? I mean, what did you know? What do you think he knew?
Yes. So the atheists, I can confirm, all got emails being invited to one Christian versus 20 atheists. And also, you can even go before, there was a Jubilee Surrounded video with Alex O'Connor. It was one atheist versus 20 Christians, the reverse. So Jubilee wanted to do the reverse. They invited everybody to do the reverse. Okay. I actually got confirmation from one of the directors that they communicated they wanted Peterson to be the hero of Christianity. They call him the hero sometimes. Okay. In the emails. So Peterson's team understood what Jubilee was asking for. And to make things even clearer, right before we started filming, we were all there. Peterson comes in. We're like, oh, wow, celebrity and all that. And after he said hi to everyone, they said, okay, guys, welcome to their production of One Christian versus 20 Atheists. They announced it. Peterson heard that and said, kind of giggled and said, maybe some people would not be happy about that, or some people wouldn't think that, as if to embrace the label, but say that it's like sort of controversial. So he was aware, which is why it was so confusing during the clip that I offered. But yeah, that's a little bit of the background. And right now the video is titled Jordan Peterson versus 20 Atheists. They changed the title post-release. 4 hours after they released it, they changed the title. Now, exactly why, it's not quite clear.
Although it is obvious that he whined about it, right? He must have been the person who complained, or someone in his team or something. So it's really clear that the premise was one thing. He couldn't deliver on that. And as a way of face saving, has changed the title, whined about it to get it changed. It's kind of pathetic, really. I want to stay neutral about this as much as possible, but that is kind of just pretty lame, isn't it?
Yes.
Sorry. Go on.
No, you go. Okay. Well, yeah. I mean, they got backlash. A lot of the Christians weren't happy. Like, why did you invite this guy? He's not one of us. So they got a lot of backlash. Even the atheists were confused. So I think that might have been it. My wife actually thinks that they were playing 4D chess, that changing the title would have caused more of a stir, more controversy, and more clicks. But I'm not so sure if that's correct or not. I think I'm with you, Alex, on your assessment.
Alex, what would you have said if you'd have been in that chair?
I wouldn't have been as witty, for certain. I'd have been much slower. But the point you were going for, Dan, tell me if I'm getting this wrong, but it was that he'd offered this definition of worship, and we will talk more as we go forward about his problems with definitions. It seemed to me maybe didn't really get what a definition is or something anyway. But he was giving a definition of worship, and it was clear that it was a weird one. I mean, the proposition in the first place was that atheists worship. What was it? They all worship something like that.
Right.
I mean, do we know it exactly?
Something. Everybody worships something, even atheists, even if they don't know it.
And so the point is that, like, it's controversial, it's sort of triggering in a way, because, like, worship is typically like a religious term, and obviously there's a counterpart word in general vernacular or whatever, but it's like saying everybody prays to something even if they don't know or whatever. Right? Praying is a religious, or everyone gives tithing to something, whatever, right? It's not a neutral term. It's obviously going to make you think, well, worship is a religious kind of practice, and I don't do any religious practices like that. So what's this guy on about? And the way of him, he wasn't saying you actually do the same thing as Christians, like a religious practice or something. That wasn't his point. His point was that if we use the word worship in a slightly different way, maybe it does cover what you're doing as somehow, right? And in order to make that, I guess, in order to sort of hide the bait and switch, almost like he's giving a definition that's like not very clear and easy for him to keep maneuvering and going, well, I didn't quite say it like that. What do you mean by blah, blah, blah? Instead of just going, yeah, cards on the table. This is what I mean by worship. Because he could have been. He goes, oh, worshipping stuff just means, well, I mean, he kind of did say it like this, just means that you prioritize it. Cool. In that case, I do worship stuff. But now the claim isn't controversial anymore. It's not even interesting. It's like saying by worship, I mean you wear shoes. Well, once we've figured it out that that's what you mean, okay, great. Well, now it's just boring, but what's the fun even in debating that? So the point, anyway, I'm getting sidetracked, but the point you were trying to say was, look, here's this definition you've offered, but it kind of misfires, right? It ends up classifying things that we wouldn't normally classify as being worship. And I think it was a clever way of putting it, because instead of just saying, oh, the definition, this definition of like atheist, which means you just lack a belief, and then people go, oh, that means a rock is an atheist. Right? It was a similar sort of argument to that, where you were saying, oh, hold on, if that's what you mean by worship, then you must, it follows from that Catholics worship Mary because they prioritize. What was the other thing? Revere, was that one of them?
Sacrifice for.
Exactly.
It was attend, prioritize, and sacrifice for.
Exactly right. So the point is that, like, a lot you can attend, prioritize, and sacrifice for Mary, but the Catholic Church is obviously quite clear that they don't worship Mary. Like, worship is sort of a term that's reserved only for the attitude, like Craig was saying, really towards the Almighty, like the ultimate. Like everything else, you can have some kind of like they like Mary, I think Mary's super important or whatever. Technically, it's not worship. So him purportedly being Catholic, I mean, he goes to Catholic Mass. Is he Catholic? Who knows? But he, that's the denomination that he associates with. So he should like be worried if he's like misunderstood the notion of worship as relevant in the Catholic tradition. And I mean, at the very least, it's sort of tripping himself up because he's getting his own religious doctrines wrong. But also, it's just like, what are you saying? Like, just be clear about it. Do you actually mean this? And he couldn't commit to a corollary of a definition that he gave. And that was kind of weaselly and annoying. And yeah, as this will come as a pattern for the rest of the discussion, but it kind of just made me think he's missing a few key ideas that help do a sort of philosophy chat like that. The sort of thing, Danny, that you were like, even if you haven't studied to a PhD level at university or whatever, scrapping on Discord with apologists, you can sort of get to know these kind of things. I think that Peterson just hadn't been forged in that environment where you're like fighting, and the words you say, you're gonna be held to the consequences of those immediately, and you need to be like thinking clearly and saying it correctly first time. You don't have all day to waffle around, right? He didn't realize that was the environment he was in. You understood entirely what the environment was. He kind of thought, oh, I'll be able to just lecture at these kids, and anything I say, they're going to be just like dumbfounded and awestruck, and I'll just be able to say anything I like. Whereas you were like, no, this is just like two guys on Discord who don't know each other. We're just going to like figure out who's like on top of this material more. And even though it was his point, it just seemed like he didn't understand it very well. It was crazy. Anyway, yeah.
So I wonder if he had said atheists prioritize things. would it really have been any different in its content?
Yeah.
That's ultimately what he's saying. But the worship term is so provocative. But ultimately, it just means the same thing in his mind.
I mean, I think he's going for...
Dan, what do you have to say?
Yeah, well, I think he's going for a definition that I think what he meant to go for was a definition that's sort of like, I think it's either Otto or Tillich who put it that an object of worship is an object of ultimate concern. The problem is that's not the definition that he gave, right? The definition that he gave is something that you would tend to prioritize and sacrifice for. And he was even, in his initial objection to you, he was confused about how exactly he should object, because he said, no, I didn't say prioritize overall humans. But if he doesn't say that, then the case is actually worse for him, right? If it's just that you like prioritize this entity potentially in the same way that you prioritize any other human being, then that's certainly not something that's at the top of this hierarchy that he wants us to have in mind. And then, of course, he goes into talking about a hierarchy, even though he didn't, to the extent that he talked about one at all, it was that, something that you attend to or prioritize, maybe your attention or your prioritization forms a hierarchy, though I think one could question that too, whether that's really true about humans psychologically, that's how we prioritize and attend to things. But supposing that is true, he wants to talk about not just something that's somewhere on that hierarchy, which is what would be consistent with his original definition, but rather something that's at the apex of that hierarchy. I think what he does throughout is this kind of sophistical move that I sometimes see like freshman students do, where they just define a bunch of terms in such a way that they end up being right. And so what ends up happening is that either, there's sort of fork that happens. Either he's right because we accept his definitions, but in which case he's just trivially right, or we reject his, he means something other than how we defined words, in which case he could be non-trivially right, but in that case he's speaking incorrectly.
Danny, I want to ask you, do you think he knew the format before time? Like, was he ready for this sort of thing?
So remember, he's a Daily Wire guy. So there's previous Daily Wire people that have done it, Ben Shapiro, Michael Knowles. And it actually, I would argue, I think Ben Shapiro and Michael were probably happy with how it went down. And so I think he was, for Peterson to be a big deal at the Daily Wire and not know that they did the same sort of show. In fact, that's probably why he was inclined to accept it. Oh, because everyone else, my friends did it, so I'm going to do it. If that's correct, then I think he knew what he was getting into. He just thought he could handle it.
What I want to go on to is the next thing, which is William Lane Craig reacting to this clip. Now, I'm sure everyone watching knows William Lane Craig, but just in case they don't, how Alex, Dan, and I met was because we've all been involved in the cosmological argument, which is the argument for God from the beginning of the universe and causality. Alex and Dan have published papers on it, and I've done this video series and interviews with leading cosmologists showing how wrong Craig is on everything he says. Oh, by the way, the book is out now. It's been 5 years in the making, and the Battle of the Big Bang, and you can buy it in shops now. But that's how we all met. So William Lane Craig, leading Christian apologist, and he's of course chipped in on this. So let's see what he had to say about your contribution.
I think that this kid just exemplifies the attitude of trying to have a gotcha moment. He's not really interested in exploring the truth of Peterson's claim. He just wants to say gotcha. And even if the kid is right, that Peterson's definition of worship would imply that Catholics worship Mary, so what? How does that affect anything, except to say that perhaps the definition is inadequate? And I think you and I would agree that indeed the definition is inadequate, that that worship involves taking God as the object of ultimate concern. And that's certainly not what Catholics do with Mary. But the more fundamental point is, I think Peterson's right. The kid is a smartass. He's not really interested in the questions of truth. He just wants to show up Jordan Peterson and expose that Peterson is committed to Catholics worshiping Mary.
Danny, it seems to me, tell me if you think I'm reading this wrong, he's basically agreeing with everything that you said, but still wants to insult you. Am I reading that right? What do you think?
I mean, it comes across, but I want to ask you for what I actually think Craig, there's two interpretations of what Craig is saying. And I want to know what y'all think. One interpretation is that all I was trying to do is basically get him to say Catholics worship Mary and just stop it there. Kind of like, that's the gotcha. Because, there's a background Protestant dispute about, the Mary status and all that. And then he goes on to say, well, he could have, maybe gone in the direction the definition is no good. The second interpretation is acknowledging that what I was trying to do was not just simply get him to say that Catholics worship Mary, but that because that basically is a reductio ad absurdum, that you need to revise your definition. So the second interpretation builds in what I was trying to do is show that the definition is inadequate. I don't know how do y'all read what Craig is trying to say there?
Alex.
Well, it felt to me quite frustrating because Craig was like, oh yeah, the definition was inadequate. And I kind of just wanted to be like, right, keep going. So what follows from the definition was inadequate? So Peterson was confused because he gave the definitions, his definition, and forced that upon him. So he made a mistake, blundered. All you did was show him this as a stupid definition, which is what Craig seems to think it was. So I think it was a huge amount of substance in this Craig thing, but the point of substance that was there is that he agreed that the definition was bad and didn't act, it really was a consequence of the definition that Catholics worship Mary. He didn't deny that. He just said, so what? Well, so what? The point of that is that it shows that the definition is inadequate for his own religious belief, right? It's not how Catholics, he thinks he's a Catholic, it's not how they use the word. So, I mean, that even that isn't the like, I don't think you were just trying to show that his definition had this consequence that's sort of difficult for him to sort out because he's a Catholic or whatever. I think it was maybe I'm reading into this, but I thought the point was that it was like just exposing that it. Well, it was just sort of like showing that he didn't really know what he was doing. Right? He was giving this kind of waffly, wish-wash kind of stuff, and it was just like that was never going to fly. Right? He's not even playing properly. He hasn't laced his shoes up or whatever, and he's on the pitch trying to kick a football. And you're like, dude, this is half-baked. I thought that was your wider point. It wasn't like a specific thing about Catholicism. It was like, what are you doing? You're not ready to make a point or debate this. That's what I thought you were doing. You were showing the world that this guy is pretending to do philosophy like everybody else is doing. That was the point you were making. And I don't see how Craig's even, maybe he didn't see it that way or something, but I feel like he said nothing that kind of like understood the wider significance of this. It's not just a little trip up. It was like Peterson's not playing this game properly, like fundamentally mistaken at quite a deep level about what he's supposed to be doing. That's how I understood it. So Craig was just like off by a couple of orders of magnitude or something with his response there.
Dan, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think when Craig says that you seem to him to want a gotcha moment, I think he does have in mind that you were trying to get him to say something. But I think Alex is also right about the right interpretation of this, which is that his view has a consequence that is plainly unacceptable, right? That the consequence that there are things that no one wants to say that we worship or that they worship, and that match his definition. So then he has it's again one of these cases where he has an idiosyncratic definition. So either he is trivially right, in which case who cares, or he has a substantive point, but it's a substantive point that's incorrect. So and I think your question sort of perfectly brings this out. And I think the kinds of things that you said in response to him pressed him in exactly the right ways. Like you said, well, let's think about your definition again. This is what you said it was. You didn't say anything about hierarchy. It's not that I understand something about hierarchy. You just didn't say something about hierarchy. Like that's the kind of exchange that one might have in a classroom. And yeah, I mean, I think there's this temptation here for people to pick up different sides of this for independent political reasons, because Peterson is this divisive figure. And I don't want to psychoanalyze Craig, but it's possible that he didn't want to alienate the portion of his own largely conservative audience who looks up to Peterson as a kind of cultural hero.
I would like to point out. Oh, go ahead, Phil. Sorry.
No, go.
Okay. I like to. There was something else I was trying to show, but I didn't. It wasn't clear. Notice that when it came to Catholics worshiping Mary, he was willing to get more nuance. He started making distinctions about attending. Right. He wanted to accommodate the Catholic, what Catholics would say, but he's not willing to do that for atheists. Right. Because he knows that Catholics don't want to say that they worship Mary. They don't want to say that, but he should know that atheists don't want to say we worship stuff either. So it's a double standard, right? It's a double standard. Okay, let's accommodate the Catholic case, but let's just let's not be charitable to what atheists would say, how they would delineate between how they would just make distinctions. And so there was, I think, a double standard I was trying to reveal there. And the second thing is that Craig was saying that it was a gotcha. I think the prompt is a gotcha, right?
Yes.
What is the prompt is a rage bait, because why would he pick that prompt? Because atheists are naturally resistant to saying that we worship things, because we associate worship with deity and religion, okay, which is something that we're not really about. So the whole thing starts with a gotcha, and I was just playing the game. I don't know why Craig doesn't see that. And Craig does say, Danny doesn't engage with the claim. Well, what claim? It's the prompt. It can't be that the claim that Christianity is true, because Peterson doesn't want to say Christianity is true in this whole exchange. It is. So what? Now, if Craig hears this, when you say that I don't explore his claim, what claim are you referring to? The word? Oops. What claim are you referring to? Are you referring to Christianity being true? Because Peterson's not committed to that here, right? Or is it the prompt, which is just itself a gotcha for atheists?
Well, one thing that I thought was interesting is that Craig didn't actually watch the whole thing. He's just responding to the clips that have been shown to him. And the same thing happened, Dan and I appeared on Joe Schmidt's podcast, and we were criticizing Bill Craig about his views on the origin of the universe. And again, he responded to it without watching the whole thing. And many people have responded to it without watching the whole thing. I saw Matt Dillahunty review it, Trent Doherty, and they're all responding without actually watching it. They don't seem to know the context of what's going on. And one of the things that I thought the context is that this show, Jubilee, it's kind of entertainment, right? It's not supposed to be a deep dive into philosophical issues. It's like dip your toe in the water in philosophical issues. And it's a bit of a show, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But how can he criticize you for playing the game that the show is?
Yeah, that was really lame. Was like he wasn't sitting down like a student in a lecture, taking notes and being respectful. It's fucking Jubilee Surrounded, man. Like, what do you think's happening in that? You get like 5 minutes to shout at the person you sat opposite. I mean, go and watch the ones. I watched the Sam Cedar one, progressive versus 20 conservatives or whatever. It's just carnage. It's crazy. It's a dumpster fire of like just idiots coming up and not like Sam Cedar's obviously amazing, but all the people he was talking with, it was crazy. So like the idea that like what would happen on this stage would be this kind of studious, educated enlightenment. I'm seeking to discover the truth. That's not the platform for that. I mean, that's just because he didn't know what the platform was, I think.
I think, as I said before, I think it maybe wouldn't be posed in quite the same way, but the argument, the back and forth that happened, it resembled what you'd see in a philosophy classroom, where a student proposes a definition, and then I say, okay, but this has this consequence, and you write it on the board. They don't find that acceptable, so it's like, okay, I guess we need a different definition. And then this past semester, I taught an upper level seminar in philosophy of science, and we devoted the first quarter or so of the semester to talking about the demarcation problem, the problem of distinguishing science from non-science, the problem of finding necessary and sufficient conditions for something to be scientific. And for that entire portion of the semester, we're going through various definitions one might have of science and showing how those definitions are inadequate. And of course, the definitions that various students came into the semester with all turned out to be inadequate. And that's, in the same way, if it was going to be a seminar on, like an upper level seminar on philosophy of religion, and maybe you spend some portion of the semester talking about what exactly worship is, then you'd be covering the same ground. But also, it's also pointing out that it seemed to me that a lot of the atheists that were present had some kind of background where they had read about philosophy, or they're sort of familiar with religious studies or philosophy in some capacity. But unless I'm mistaken, I don't think anyone in that room had an advanced degree in either philosophy or theology. So it's sort of, I don't understand this position that Craig has, that like Peterson would never be asked by a university to teach an upper level seminar on philosophy of religion or something like that. He doesn't have the specialization in that area. Like, it's just bizarre. Like, it's obviously for entertainment. And the fact that, there were a few moments, I think yours is an example, where some interesting intellectual points came through is almost by accident, right? They didn't ask Richard Swinburne to go up there. They asked Jordan Peterson.
All right. And actually, just as an aside, and if you want to keep it private, confidential, that's fine. But how old are you, Danny?
I'm 32.
Okay, so slight presumption on quite a few of the commentators here.
Let them believe it. Let them believe it.
I mean, to be fair, Craig is so fucking old that from his perspective, you are a child. So, for him to say child, that's fair enough.
Fair enough. All right, shall we go on to the next clips?
Atheists reject God, but they don't understand what they're rejecting.
Yeah.
My experience with atheists is twofold, is that they have a very reductive notion of what constitutes God, let's say in the Judeo-Christian tradition. And they've often been hurt by someone who is religious, or by the religious enterprise, or perhaps by God himself, so to speak, and that's left them with an animus. God rewards Moses with a glimpse of the divine. So this is a definition of the God that atheists are hypothetically rejecting. The divine is fundamentally unknowable. It's a pinnacle experience, and that people in their finitude have to be shielded from a comprehensive vision of the basis of reality. That we were finite and we had to establish a relationship with the infinite. So Elijah, the prophet Elijah, defined God in the Old Testament as the voice of conscience within. Of God as conscience is a lot more precise and oriented than your definition of the God that you hypothetically disbelieve in.
It's irrelevant.
I don't care about common parlance. I'm trying to get to something fundamental. I made a specific point that God was associated with conscience.
All right, so obviously I've strung a few bits of that together. But Danny, tell me what your thoughts on this claim are.
Well, I know what Craig would say. That was a gotcha, or a rage bait. Once again, telling us that we don't know what we're talking about or rejecting, right? So just to put that out there. But the point is that the first person that you talk, Cade, right, is I believe academically trained in philosophy. He came from a Thomistic institute, I believe, and studied really hard, right, the concept of God, at least under Thomism. And I think he was trying to point out, I know this doesn't make sense to me. This, here's the properties of that constitute the divine, and here are the problems, right? And so I reject it, right? So I don't really see, I guess I don't really see, it sounds like what Peterson is doing is sort of redefining God in a way where atheists are like, well, look, now I'm actually rejecting this thing here, okay? You're just redefining it in a way where, I'm not so sure what you're saying, right? And a lot of people try to say, hey, but look, let's go back to the ground level. Do you believe in a loving, good, powerful God? And then he's saying, well, I don't know, that's a myopic understanding of God, but usually that's what a lot of atheists have in mind when they're rejecting it. But I'm wondering what y'all think.
There's some context people have to know about Jordan Peterson, is that he's a Jungian. So the way I understand Jung's philosophy on religion was that religion, or the concept of God, is part of the collective unconscious. So therefore, it's sort of existing in this state. It's not out there in the world. It's part of something analogous to our DNA. Now, this claim that there is a collective unconscious is obviously quite controversial. And a lot of people think it doesn't exist at all, and Jung just made it up and it's nonsense. But to someone like Peterson, this is foundational. And he said that Jung's writings were the most important thing that happened in the 20th century. So, forget World War II or, invention of quantum mechanics or, whatever. No, Jung is the most important thing that happened in the 20th century. So looking at it through that frame, God is something very, very different to what Christians or atheists are talking about. So it's like he's wedged himself into this debate, and he's like a champion of the Christian right, I guess. But what his conception of God is totally different to what the atheists and the Christians are actually talking about. What do you think, Alex?
Yeah, so that's right. So Peterson maybe doesn't have exactly the same view as Jung, but obviously is incredibly influenced by him. And you're right that for Jung, is God an archetype? It's something like that anyway. But it's certainly part of this collective unconscious thing. And my thought is like, Jung is a contemporary of Freud. They're actually like close friends. And what's going on around that time is the birth of like psychology, psychoanalysis as a topic, and the way that like the key idea is about like how your sort of surface level conscious experience has like depths that go down underneath that you're not fully aware of, the unconscious or the subconscious or drives or whatever these. And Jung sort of has a version of that idea, which is that when you have things that are like influencing you from inside, right? In ways like the unconscious in a kind of standard Freudian sense, but like the kind of tool that's like generating the drives that are coming into your head is like some collective like thing that stretches back through evolutionary history. So like it's got sort of animalistic aspects to it. There's like a sort of lizard as an archetype because it's like this kind of contribution of like the sort of lizard history of our evolutionary tree or whatever. It's wild. I mean, it's crazy. It's a cool thing to like jump down the rabbit hole of or whatever. But I'm certainly sidetracking myself now, just trying to sort of describe Jungian. Remind me, why did I start talking about this? What the point was? Him
I
saying
think the point is,
don't understand what God is, right?
Yeah.
And so look, if it's okay if you want to say atheists don't understand what God is, he should have also said, and by the way, I think God is an archetype in the collective unconscious because I'm a Jungian, and that means blah 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 blah. And really, he also needed to say, and by the way, that's true. Like that's what God is. Because unless if he's just saying that's a candidate concept of God, right? Then the force of the kind of claim is evacuated, right? Because you could cook up a notion of God. Like I could just arbitrarily say God is a piece of toast, right? So when atheists reject God, they don't reject the piece of toast God, do they? So they don't know what they're rejecting, so they're idiots, right? That's a stupid argument because on many levels, obviously, but like the point is like unless you're going to say this is at least a plausible and mainstream candidate example, if not the correct one, it doesn't matter if someone isn't explicitly thinking about that when they say they're an atheist, right? Obviously, there's like an infinite range of different possible ways you could define the word God. And an atheist isn't actually supposed to consciously contemplate each of those and reject them. So the one thing, the other tiny little point I just wanted to make on this was like, it's strange, like if he's just trying to say, well, they don't realize that the true God notion is Jungian, and it means that it's like difficult to understand because it's intrinsically part of your sort of unconscious, pre-conscious like underpinnings or something. Fine, if it's locked away in a mysterious world where you can never see it, that does mean that atheists wouldn't be able to understand it. But if it's sort of an intrinsically unknowable thing like that, guess what? Nobody understands that, do they? Because it's a hidden unconscious thing. Like the best anyone knows about it is some brief or fleeting glimpses of it. Like you said, something about how God like shows his back to Abraham or Moses or someone like so even Moses doesn't get any more perspective on this. So is it the case also then that he thinks Christians believe in God but they don't understand him too? I mean, doesn't that follow from this idea that God's unknowable? Like nobody knows him. So if that's the case, it's just like atheists reject God but they don't understand him. Christians believe in God but they don't understand him. Was it a two-pronged claim? Because it feels like that is like it sort of follows from his definition, doesn't it? In which case, like, I'd just be like, okay, well, I do reject the unknowable God and also don't know about the unknowable God because by definition he's unknowable. Okay, cool. I agree with you. You know, you could just, if we had just been able to like get clarity, you could have said, I agree or I disagree. That's what I was thinking about.
Well, you two are giving Jubilee ideas. Now they're going to do Jordan Peterson versus 20 Christians. Right, so
yes, great idea.
Yeah,
Dan, any thoughts?
So let's see. So there's something that's very strange to me about Peterson's use of Exodus as his example of a place in the Bible where the claim is made that God is like fundamentally unknowable. Right. So
was it Elijah that he was saying?
He claims about Exodus. He claims about Moses.
I think that's to come. Did he say that already? I can't remember.
Well, the reason this is strange to say about Exodus is because in Exodus, Moses literally, I mean, the way it's written on the page is that Moses sees God's butt, right? Like the implication is that God has a physical body, not only a physical body, but a butt. And there's this book by a historian named Francesca Stravacopoulou, whose specialization is in the history of the Bible. It's on this idea that for early Jews, for the early Israelites, God had a body, and how that idea has changed over time, and that now people think of God as this Deus absconditus, this unknowable, intangible reality. Now, one of the things that's sort of really bizarre here is something like this. If you're right that the way that atheists don't know what God is because they don't recognize this Jungian conception of God, that's the proposal that's been brought up among us, then that would have the implication that Peterson doesn't know about any atheists who are familiar with Jung and reject Jung's view of the collective unconscious. Now, either Peterson hasn't done his homework as an academic because he doesn't recognize the full breadth of responses that there have been to Jung, or he's just straight up making something up. I mean, it's difficult to understand how it could be that the Jungian conception that's that issue, and yet he doesn't understand that there are people who reject the collective unconscious, with the implication that there is no God as part of the collective unconscious. It's also strange in a way because there's another historical figure. There's this 19th century figure named Ludwig Feuerbach, who is generally recognized as an atheist, but was someone who had this atheistic reinterpretation of the Bible, where it turns out that the Bible is really about the human mind. And so we learn about human psychology by looking at the Bible, or so says Feuerbach. Now, that's it. The reason I bring this up is because if Jung gives us this reinterpretation of the Bible, the question that I have is like, why shouldn't we understand Jung just as we understand Feuerbach as an atheist? Why shouldn't we also understand Jung as an atheist? And I'm not sure what either Jung or Peterson would say in response to that, but that's an issue. If he had presented his view in any complete way, that's something that I imagined he would have to answer.
Yeah, I think the actual honest show from Jubilee would be 1 Jungian versus 20 critics of Jung. But nobody would be interested in that, right? So they're not going to do that. But that would, I think, be the honest show. But let's move on to the next clip.
Pew Research studies suggest that atheists and agnostics actually know more about religion and about religious stories, the foundational principles, than believers.
That's because they're more religious than they think they are. They're concerned with deep matters. And one of the defining characteristics of someone who's oriented in a religious direction is that they're concerned with deep matters.
Okay.
In fact, it's virtually definition.
Right, but they are
religious. And most people, for example, in the United States, deny that they're religious, but accept that they're spiritual.
Okay, just a quick fact check before we go to the panel. I was going to show a screenshot about that last claim because it's obviously false, right? So this is a Pew research that was last done 2023, and it shows that 22% are spiritual, not religion. Now, last I checked, 22% is not a majority. And in fact, what we see here is that we've got 62% Christians, we've got 7% other religions. That is clearly a majority in the United States are religious. I mean, clearly, he's a central character in the sort of culture wars regarding Christianity and its involvement in politics. How can he not know that the majority of Americans describe themselves as religious, specifically Christian? And this is a long-term thing. Like, there's data going back to 2007. Obviously, we could go back way longer. The idea that America is like spiritual but not religious, I mean, that's just, it's rare that you get a specific claim from Peterson that you can go and check. But there was one, and we did it totally wrong. But anyway, Danny, what do you have to say about these claims that you made here?
Well, it goes back to what I think Dan said earlier, right? Well, he can just define religious in a way where he's right. I'm not the way that I think later on he defines religious as like it's tied to like meaning or something like that, or deep thinking, or I don't know. Like, So there's we with Peterson, like it's not again, it's never clear what he's saying when what does he mean when he says that atheists are very religious? I mean, it's just a chore to go through.
Alex?
Yeah, I think that this is like Frank Turek level, like triggering sort of topics, right? Because saying to an atheist, "Oh, you're really religious because you like thinking about questions like this," is obviously triggering because they're going to say, "No, religious means you're a member of a religion, right? I'm not. I'm an atheist. That's the whole point of atheism. So like we don't do that. We do other stuff." So if you're just going to say, but like, and I suppose this is like where we have to start talking about his understanding of what a definition is, because he said, like, it's one of the definitional features or characterizing features of the religious attitude that you're like interested in deep questions or something, right? And then he said, it's practically definitional. And it's like, okay, hold on a second. So just think about that slowly, right? Like if I said, if I said to you, part of the definition, one of the defining characteristics of a triangle is that it's a shape. Right? Go, yeah, that's right. And if I said, it's basically definitional, like, no, it's not, is it? It's not the definition of a triangle that it's a shape. It's just one of the necessary conditions, right? A definition isn't just a necessary condition, right? Pasta is yellow, but the definition of pasta isn't yellow, right? This is really obvious, but typically in philosophy, definition is a set of necessary and sufficient conditions, right? So it's things that have to be true for the definition to be true, and things which, well, at least taken to collectively, if they're true, then the definition is true, right? That's just all we mean. And all he was doing was pointing at potentially necessary conditions, but not wrapping them up in the like and sufficient part of it. So it didn't come to be a definition, and that's like basically what he said for the definition of God, the definition of belief, the definition of worship, the definition of religiosity. All four of those examples, he makes the same blunderous mistake each time, confusing a necessary condition for a joint set of necessary and sufficient conditions. And it's kind of, I hate to say it like this, but it is philosophy 101. It's like, maybe he's transcended that and he's some like super Wittgensteinian, like uber philosophy guy who knows that necessary and sufficient conditions is a sort of limited analysis or something like that. But probably not, because he doesn't actually give the impression he's like that at all. He just was tripping himself up over how am I supposed to communicate this idea clearly in a short space of time. And he kept reaching for the word definition lazily without really thinking about what that meant, giving people definitions saying he was going to give people definitions, but only providing necessary conditions, so that then when you try and pin him down on it, he goes, oh no, there's actually other necessary conditions, and I'm allowed to just keep changing what I said, because, anyway, that was his game, if you ask me. It was like the most sort of straightforward way, if you want to understand what he was doing, like the mistake he was making. Remember, we can call this the Peterson fallacy from now on, which is like not understanding what a definition is and blundering that in a debate.
Dan?
Yeah, well, so I was thinking about this beforehand because, Alex had told me about that this is one of the things that goes wrong with Peterson, that he is confused about what definitions are. And I was imagining, suppose that you were debating with someone who thought that the time travel is not only possible but actual. There were time travelers among us somewhere. And then they said to you, well, you believe in DeLoreans, right? And like, yeah, people used to drive those back in the 80s. Aha! You see, according to Back to the Future, a time machine is a DeLorean. Of course, that doesn't win the debate, but it's this idiotic, sophistical move where if you're slippery enough with language, you can just define yourself as a winner. Beat out the clock, and then decide that you pwned all of your opponents or something. It's not only sophistical, it's childish.
Yeah, and a little bit of trivia. The original time machine, when they wrote the script for Back to the Future, was a fridge. Less interesting, I think. But what I want to do now is
decision not to go with that.
Yeah, better to make it a car. Anyway, what I want to do now is just come out the Jubilee and look at how Jordan Peterson responds when he's asked, does he believe in God? And he actually made this little video. It's on his channel, and I've got a few clips from it here.
I had three sort of burgeoning hypotheses. One was, it's none of your damn business. That's the first one. Another one was,
No hypothesis.
well, what do you mean by believe? Push.
Yeah, Alex, go on. I wanted to say that.
What? None of your goddamn business. As a speech act, doesn't even express a proposition. It's like sort of go away or shut the door or something. It's like certainly not a hypothesis. Anyway, a little bit nitpicky.
And the question is, do you believe in God? So it should be yes, no, or if you define it this way. It's not a hypothesis, right? I mean, it's just
If push comes to shove, as far as I'm concerned, what you believe is what you act out, not what you say. And then, and if you're an integrated person, then what you act out and what you say are the same thing. And then you're a person whose word can be trusted, right? Because what you say and what you do are isomorphic. They're the same thing. But
hang on, Dan, can I just check something? Isomorphic doesn't mean exactly the same thing. Check me. I thought it meant like same function or same shape or something like that, but not identical.
Yeah,
right?
You don't have to get into the technical definition of an isomorphism. But yeah, it's a particular kind of mapping that we can define between mathematical objects.
The one-to-one mapping, right?
Yeah. It basically means that, two things are isomorphic if in a way that can be made technical, they have the same mathematical structure. But it's the usual thing that Peterson does is he grabs onto big, complicated sounding words and then throws them around. And if someone challenges him, he just slips onto something else.
It reminds me of Deepak Chopra that way. Drop in lots of like sciencey sounding words, sound sophisticated when they weren't needed. He could have just said they're the same thing and it would have been fine, right? But anyway, let's move on.
Belief is instantiated in action. So I have also suggested that I act as if I believe in God. And then the third is that I'm afraid that he might exist, which I think is the most comical of the three answers and perhaps the most accurate one. Say you do believe in God. You believe that there's a divine power that oversees everything, that is fundamentally ethical, that's watching everything you do, and you believe that. And so what effect does that have on your...
Danny, what do you think? Thoughts on like his responses to... three replies to "Do you believe in God?"
Yeah, actually, Zizek made this point. I forget, he cited a book. I don't remember what book it was, but he was talking about how do the Greeks really believe that there's a Zeus up there on Mount Olympus, with a Hera, a scornful Hera. Do they really believe that? And what Zizek's move was that no, they didn't really believe any of that, or they might have not really believed it. It was religion is about practice, right? But what Peterson does here is doesn't take that move. Says, well, belief and practice are just identical, or a misuse of isomorphic. So I don't see why. I mean, I don't see. I think there's a certain sense of belief in which, if I outline, then Peterson doesn't have to say, well, yeah, then I don't believe. I just do what the Greeks do, and I practice religion. And I guess that's my response here. I think it's I think it's too big of a collapse to say that your commitments about what's true and then what you do, to collapse them into the same thing, or it's too big of a move, in my opinion.
Yeah, I wonder if he couldn't just say like, okay, there's different ways I can think about it. I could think about it as a proposition. Is this true? And then I could think about it as, do I live this way?
He denies that in the video. He does not, in Jubilee specifically says belief is not propositional.
Right. Yeah.
Which is nonsense.
Dan,
okay. One of the... It can't be that something that you that you assent to mentally, what we ordinarily call a belief, and something that you do are precisely the same thing, in part because one expresses a proposition and the other does not. Now, it could be that your actions are either consistent or inconsistent with things that you think to be true, but it could be that two different people who are not acting inconsistently with what they think, nonetheless do the same action. So here's an example. I have many friends who consider themselves to be Jewish, but also consider themselves to be atheists. And to varying degrees, some of them participate in things that are right. Phil is one of these people. And there are some people who are culturally Jewish, still keep various traditions alive that were historically tied up with beliefs about God or whatever, but and I know others don't, but keeping a ritual like that alive may be consistent with things that you think, like the importance of your culture, or the way that it respects your ancestors, or that it has a value for you because it's something you did as a child. I mean, I know even for myself, I don't consider myself a Christian, but in some ways I do things that are kind of similar to what the culturally Jewish person is doing when they keep a tradition alive, because I still celebrate, for example, Christmas. But I don't do that because I think that I assent to any proposition about Jesus being our Messiah or Lord or God or anything like that. It's rather because it has this, it had a kind of value that's acquired for me because of my childhood and because of the meaning it has for my family, and a whole bunch of other things that you don't have to get into. But it's consistent then with things that I think, but it's not consistent with some religious belief that I don't possess. And then, this whole idea that a belief is non-propositional is just frankly kind of batshit. I mean, I don't understand how to take that seriously. A belief is, sometimes when philosophers talk about beliefs is different the way that the non-philosophers, non-academics talk about it. But either way, I take it that a belief involves something that you mentally assent to. Right? I mean, so sometimes, yeah.
One other thing about the first one, it's none of your goddamn business or whatever. I think that's fine. If you're like a private person, someone asks you and you say, I don't want to tell you, I think that's completely okay. But let's not forget, he's going into arenas and debating atheists. Mm. Surely in that setting, it's relevant to say what your beliefs are. Right?
Well, it's not any kind of analysis of what it means when he says that anything about belief in God either, right? I mean, it's just, if he doesn't want to talk about his own views publicly, fine, then don't go around giving talks about his own views. Like, I don't understand, like, you can't have it both ways. In fact, here's what's sort of ironic about this whole thing. He is the one whose actions don't line up with the things that he mentally assents to. Right? Like, he's doing the actions of someone who wants to go around promoting various ideas, and yet he doesn't actually want to do that. So I don't understand. I can't make sense of what it is that he thinks that he's doing.
Join the club, Alex.
Well, so if there's a sense in which it's true, because you could think that Peterson is like grifting or something and doesn't believe in God, and I don't know, like Nietzsche or Machiavelli or something, he thinks the general population need to believe in God, but he's enlightened enough to see that that's not for him, kind of thing. And like, I don't know enough Peterson law to know if this is right. And I was speaking to Nathan Ormond yesterday, who knows loads about this, but he was trying to kind of caution me away from this reading. So maybe this is not like, maybe this isn't right. But my suspicion on thinking this through the first couple of days of like mulling this over in my head, I was thinking, well, Peterson's idea is something like, because we remember he's a therapist, really, or psychologist at least, and his early work was in like addiction studies, and a lot of the way he talks about it is a bit like the way people in Alcoholics Anonymous talk about like a higher power, and like the way to sort of get yourself out of your self-centered kind of addictive behaviors or whatever is to prioritize something above yourself, and that's a way of like clawing yourself out of the hole that you find yourself in an addiction. And yet, I was thinking maybe it's plausible to me anyway to think that you. And for all I know, I'm not a Jung scholar either. Maybe Jung says something like this as well, that you have to sort of engage with this theistic kind of idea, this archetype that's buried deep in our psyche or something. If you're not like being a kind of spiritual person in that way, then your psychological kind of inner life will be in turmoil and tension and deficient. So maybe like an alcoholic, where there's something kind of like preventing them from being the fullest person they could be, which is their addiction or whatever. And like, maybe he thinks, maybe that's what he thinks is like good for everyone. All these like incel men who don't tidy their room or whatever, right? And really, they should be like prioritizing a higher power above themselves, and that will make them more sort of disciplined and able to get a job and be functional or something. And what he's doing is trying to make the world a better place, but actually he doesn't believe that God exists because he's just some like intellectual nihilist, like Nietzsche or something. Maybe, I don't know. Nathan doesn't think that. So I bow to somebody else's, to almost anybody else's knowledge of Peterson over mine. Like,
I'm not a Young scholar or a Peterson scholar, if such a thing exists, but I would point out that in the discussion that we're talking about, the one that was on Jubilee, he says at some point, he makes I don't remember what exactly he phrases this, but he says at some point that God is is metaphysically fundamental or foundational, and that God is the creator of the universe. That makes it sound like it can't be just that. It can't be just that it's your own personal higher power.
mm-hmm.
And the other reason I say that is, so someone kind of picked up on, so at some points in the discussion, Peterson seems to be saying that whatever you regard as at the apex of your personal priorities or whatever you think is most valuable is then God. That would have the implication that some kind of polytheism was true, because what different people value most, well, that differs from one person to another. And there was a person who, I don't remember which one of the atheists in the discussion pointed this out, but that just obviously has the implication that polytheism is true. And Peterson didn't seem to want to concede that. He wanted to say that no, it's monotheism that's true, which seems to suggest that it's not just a matter of what you like psychologically value most. So perhaps what he's saying is that what any individual person regards as their God is what they value most. But what they regard as their God is distinct from the reality of God. That could be one way
that's
of
right.
Yeah.
I think the point is supposed to be that like you could have a pathology which promotes like money or something to be your highest priority. And what you've done then is you've subverted the natural healthy order of a human psyche, which is to have an outside metaphysical power as your highest value or something. And it's a symptom of an illness that you've like confused yourself and put money there. And materialism is a kind of a pathology that you could have. And what you need to do to get well again is to switch out the materialist pursuit of whatever, money or something, and make it more spiritual. And if you do that, then you'll be a better person. But of course, the person doing that, I think, he thinks they shouldn't be going, oh, I'm too obsessed with money. I know, I'll become a polytheist, right? He's going to say, that's not going to work, right? Because if you've got like Zeus and whatever, Apollo and blah, 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 you're not going to be focusing everything on that one thing. That's the thing, the Alcoholics Anonymous idea, where you're like dragging yourself out of a hole by looking at, you're trying to like see this light in the horizon and go towards it or something. If there's loads of lights, it doesn't really work. So like from a therapeutic point of view, polytheism isn't going to work, right? And on this hypothesis that I've got, which I'm not saying is true, I don't know if it's true at all. On this hypothesis is pretend, right, that he's an atheist and he knows God doesn't exist and he's just trying to make other people well again. He's going to say, no, polytheism isn't true. But what he means by that is, I want you to think that polytheism isn't true, because I want you to think that monotheism is true, because that's the key that unlocks the archetype that's buried in your collective subconscious and allows you to be this full person actualizing his character to its fullest potential, whatever the fuck jargon, deeper D stuff that he comes out with after that. But I think it's like, so he's caught between wanting to say, this is the pill you should swallow, and also saying, I'm not swallowing the pill, right? Don't give it to me. Right, and that's the tension that he's struggling with here. He wants to say it's kind of true, but I want you to think it's true, but I'm not saying it's true for me. And then I don't know. I might be completely off here. Any Peterson fans want to leave comments down below telling me how much of a fucking idiot I am, please do that.
Oh, it's going to be a lot of fun. That's going to be a lot of fun. All right, let's move on to the next clip.
My next claim is that morality and purpose cannot be found within science.
I think that your claim is really being framed to be morality and purpose can only be found in religion. Is that how you're kind of framing it?
I would say that the domain of religion is the domain of morality and purpose, yes.
So in the Bible, it talks a lot about slavery, right?
Yes.
Yes. So in that, it teaches you how to take care of a slave. Rather than saying slavery is wrong, I think it should
says
say
that in the story of Moses.
says slavery is incorrect. It says
Well,
it's
that's
immoral.
why Moses leads his people away from slavery. I would say that the reason we evolved, so to speak, away from slavery was because the West was founded on Judeo-Christian morality and the presumption that every person was made in the image of God.
Wouldn't you
And so
say
slavery itself became immoral, and
Yeah.
that was established by Protestant Christians in the
Yes.
UK. I think
Christianity
it's the
says-
flowering of the ideas that were embedded in the biblical texts
Well,
across long spans of time.
I feel like
Danny, talk to me about morality.
Okay, so if I was in that guy's chair, I mean, like these people, look, and they should be. Maybe I'm just a mean person. If I was in that guy's chair, I would have just cut him off. Like, that's just not true. That's not Exodus is not teaching that slavery is immoral, right? You're just wrong. And if you think you're right, show me, right? And he was really, I think I would have cut him off like twice, but he was trying to be nice. But yeah, that's the first thing, is that the whole Exodus thing. I don't know where he's getting that from, probably from some apologist, down in the corner of YouTube. And then, also in the beginning, I think that, what's his name? The contestant, he pointed out correctly that you're just basically saying that only morality comes from God or religion, right? Because there are atheists. In fact, myself, I don't believe that I use a scientific method to come down to, should I give to charity today or not? Like, I'm fine to say that morality is outside the scope of scientific inquiry. I mean, I could be wrong about that. The point is that atheists are not united on that, and it doesn't turn the conversation at all, right? I could be wrong. If I'm wrong about that, then sure, okay. It doesn't matter. What does that have to do with Christianity and atheism?
Yeah, actually, as minor aside, Wang Mang, the Chinese emperor can't remember, like 9 BC or 19 BC, he abolished slavery. It didn't last, but it's clearly not a necessary. Christianity can't be a necessary condition to oppose slavery if a Chinese emperor abolished it as well. But anyway, Alex.
Okay, so yeah, I agree with Danny. It's true that atheists don't all have the same view on this, and it's perfectly reasonable to be a kind of non-naturalist. There's loads of non-naturalist atheists.
Alex, define naturalism. Not everyone's going to know what that means in this context, because it's a different context.
In this context, when we're talking about like what the nature of moral values are, so meta-ethics, then broadly speaking, you can like chop the views in half. Whereas there's some people who say that moral claims are true, at least can be true sometimes, and then there's people who don't think that. So maybe they think they just express a value or something. So we can call these like realists and anti-realists. On the realist side, if you zoom in a little bit further, you find that divides them two again, and you've got one group of people who say that when these claims are true, they're grounded in natural properties of some description. So I think you could put Sam Harris in that if you want to find some kind of like token, well-known person. So he's saying that what goodness is sort of reduces to talk about what increases well-being in sentient creatures or something, where that's supposed to be a kind of scientifically tangible property that you could just about measure or something. And then on the other group of realists are people who say that these claims, at least sometimes some of them are true, but they're not reducible to any specific like natural properties. So this is what like G.E. Moore in early 20th century sets this view out, where he's basically just saying moral values are like non-reducible. So when you say something is good, you don't mean like some synonym or some set of necessary and sufficient conditions that catches it out in other talk, like maximizes well-being or is what God wants me to do or something like that, right? So naturalists, it doesn't have to be scientifically amenable like Sam Harris view. Divine command theory counts as naturalism on this classification scheme as well, because it's just saying the good can be defined in terms of something else, right? The non-naturalist just said, no, good isn't definable in any other terms. It's just kind of bedrock concept. So you could be like that. I don't know, Danny, if that's your view, but something roughly along those lines maybe is what the sort of thing you were gesturing towards. And yeah, you can be an atheist and hold that view if you want to. Atheism doesn't dictate any specific moral view. But just very quickly, one additional thing is that I think Peterson's holding on to a kind of straightforward, simple understanding of what Nietzsche says about morality, right? So Nietzsche, like everybody knows this. Nietzsche in in the gay science, and in Thus Spoke Zarathustra has these lines about God is dead, right? This is person who kind of joker that comes into the village and announces that God is dead, and everybody sort of throws tomatoes at him and doesn't ignore and doesn't listen to him, whatever. Anyway, cool, weird, cryptic bit of philosophy going on over there. But Nietzsche's point was something like this. Is, at least it's one way of understanding what he's saying, is that like there is no concept of God that we all believe in now, sort of scientifically, whatever. We've like got beyond that rationally, sort of understood that that's just a fable, a kind of primitive thing, whatever. But general people on the street still go around thinking charity's good and I should turn the other cheek. And maybe we've sort of let go of the ontological claims, but we're still carrying around the kind of vestige of the moral implications or something of the previous worldview haven't left us yet. We're still carrying those around. And what Nietzsche wants the future generations to do following his work, because he's very self-centered and assumes that he must be the catalyst that changes everything, is that we should be revaluing our system, the artists of moral values or something, and like change those and be more bold about it. We're sort of bolder ontologically, but we need to be bolder in terms of value as well. I kind of feel like maybe that's just what Peterson sort of says and like Shell.
Let me question you on that, like, because Peterson's often saying Nietzsche's warning us that if we abandon God, we're going to get totalitarianism. Is that what Nietzsche is saying?
I mean, some people read Nietzsche as saying something like that. Yeah, Nietzsche does talk about there being like, I think it's in this insanely titled book that's called Why I Am So Wise. And I think the subtitle is I Am the Hammer of History or something. It's bad. It's like if he was a music form, it would be like metal or something. So anyway, yeah, and in there I think he talks about how Europe is going to see a century of disaster and calamities and blah 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 blah. And he thinks that's because there's this threat, the onset of nihilism that will come in, and it's basically because we've kicked the foundations out of our value system, but we haven't done anything about it. We're still holding on to, as I was talking about before, we're still using the terms and the turn the other cheek stuff still has purchase in society, but the ontological basis of that is gone. And if we just leave things as they are, it'll collapse, and that'll be nihilism, and that will be what happens in Europe or whatever. And he was trying to warn us against that. But it's not to say, the warning isn't, we should just all believe in God again. It's some like kind of generic middle of the road, like American, evangelical view of God or something. No, completely different. He doesn't really say what it is. It's like Marx talking about communism. It's like, this is a kind of sketch at the end of the critique of the thing that he's trying to take down. He doesn't really know what it's going to be like. So who knows what we're supposed to do? But I think Peterson's, he has a sort of some version of that idea floating around in his head that's motivating this, right? It resonates at least anyway.
Dan?
I mean, my go-to thing to talk about when this sort of thing comes up is just that I don't know why, I don't know quite why this is, but when apologists raise this kind of issue, it seems to me that a big part of what's going on is just an ignorance about philosophy, potentially on both their part and on their audience's part. For the past 2,500 years, give or take, ever since the ancient Greeks, we've had secular versions of moral realism available. You could be a Platonist or an Aristotelian or something like that. And, in some sense, the problem isn't that there's no way to have objective morality without God. The problem instead is that there's too many ways, too many proposals for how we might have objective morality without God. And the debate among professional meta-ethicists is not usually, God's not usually part of it. The debate is usually like, what is the right view to have about the foundations of ethics in a secular context? Again, like we were just talking about these two different versions of moral realism. There's the naturalistic moral realists and the non-natural moral realists. And that debate is a debate about different versions of moral realism that usually theism is not a recognized part of for the most part, but very few, with a few exceptions like Robert Adams. And so I don't understand why this has happened to our culture, that we've gotten to this place where the average person doesn't realize that there is a academic discipline that studies morality. I mean, for Peterson to get up there on stage and say, oh, it's definitional of religion that it's the domain of ethics. No, the domain of ethics is ethics. Right? Like the whole point, the whole reason we have ethics classes at universities is that there are people who devote their life to the study of ethics. Like, I don't understand how he can just go around saying this kind of thing.
Yeah, there's one thing that's quite triggering, just very quickly, but he said that was like, I guess it was in a previous clip where he was saying it was like definitional, like atheists are more religious than they think they are or something, and like he said it's definitional of the religious attitude that they're interested in deep math. No, fuck that. It's definitional of the philosophically interested mindset, right?
Yeah.
And that can be part of religion, but religion doesn't have to be interested in that, right? Like there's I forget which there's this classic Dostoevsky, is it War and Peace, whatever. Anyway, it's example of fuck this. I haven't read this stuff since I was an undergrad. I'm forgetting the detail, but really, really clearly, it's this example of the contrast between the kind of know-it-all academic priest who can tell you all of the distinctions between hypostatic union and the blah blah blah, but who's like a bad person, and then just this simple like peasant woman who barely understands the gospel, but is just like intuitively generous and like feels of religion in a deeper way, right? And now I'm trying to remember the name of the book. I've forgotten why I was starting to speak. I'm getting old. I keep forgetting. Like I get out of bed, and I'm like, "What am I doing again? What day is
If
it?"
I can add one more.
What YouTube video are you in, Alex? Do you know?
Yeah, I don't know what YouTube video I'm in. Obviously, I don't know where I am right now.
Oh man.
Well, I just want to make my. Oh, go on, Dan.
The one last thing I want to add on this point, the whole way he framed this question he framed it between religion and science. That was his framing. Which just leaves philosophy out of the conversation altogether. It's as if he somehow thinks that those are the two different approaches that you can have to the world. You can have a scientific approach or a religious approach, and that there's and it's this bizarre way of framing that. I mean, first of all, many scientists are religious, right? So it's not even that you have to have one or the other. But the other way that this is bizarre is that there's a discipline of people like, me and Alex have our PhDs in, that just isn't either science or religion, but it's this third animal. And
I wonder, Dan, if you didn't watch like a debate between Sam Harris and William Lane Craig, right? Those are my two choices.
Yeah.
I don't know, because I don't know. It's bizarre. Harris is a confusing figure. And in the start of The Moral Landscape, there's a footnote where he says that metaethics is a waste of time or something like this, even though, of course, the book is just a book on metaethics. Like it's, but
there's a sense.
I think it has something to do with the fact that, at least in the United States, other than a few mentions in like high school history classes, before college or university, there's no mention of, we don't have philosophy classes, right? I mean, my understanding is that in England, the education system is a bit different, where people actually do have a bit of a broader exposure to philosophy before they reach college or university. Do I have that right? Is that
no?
No. Well, to Dan's point that that ethics and religion are not identical. Well, if they are, then didn't Peterson say that atheists are more religious? Does that mean that we're more ethical? There's the gotcha. There's the gotcha. Right.
Just interested in the gotchas. How many we got now? Actually, okay. One last point I wanted to make is that he wants to claim credit for the Christian opposition to slavery in the 19th century, but doesn't mention that the defenders of slavery also referenced the Bible and said, "Oh, story of Ham, that depends, or how we treat your slaves." He just ignores that entirely. But also, it's true that like a lot of Western liberal values are the descendants of the Christian world. Like that's true, right? But now let's imagine the Nazis won the war, right? And that would be our values. Where would they would also be the descendants of Christian values, right? And I could point to passages in the Bible and say, yeah, what about that passage that said, will the blood be upon us, when Pilate talks to the Jews and they said, yeah, curse our children too. You could make exactly the same case for Nazism, couldn't you?
Yeah, it's just a really simple example of like after that, therefore, because of that, right? Was it post hoc ergo?
Post hoc ergo propter hoc.
Yeah, right. So it's obviously the abolition of slavery in the West, at least, came after the West was like massively Christian. So what? I mean, that's true. But also, the institution of slavery, the transatlantic slave trade, was the legacy of Christian West as well. So, like, both of them are good and bad, and it's okay if you want to accept that both. You know, it's just that a broad gate just lets anything out. Anything that's like coming out of Europe from that time period is a legacy of Christianity. If you're just going to say that, then that's fine. If you're going to say, no, only the good stuff is a legacy of Christianity, the bad stuff, that must have been because of something else. That's like Trump saying, well, the good bits of the economy, they're all the Trump economy. The bad bits, they're all the Biden economy. You can't just split it up like that. It's ridiculous.
Which is
All
what
right,
he
let's
does.
move on to the next clip. Oh, Danny, did you want to say something?
No, which is what Trump actually does, by the way. But yeah.
Yeah, that's like a literal Trump quote. He's saying the bad bits of the Biden economy.
Right.
The all-knowing, all-powerful, all-good, perfect notion of God that plenty of Christians prescribe themselves. So I guess
How is that relevant to this claim?
You're basing a position of morality and purpose in some notion of God that isn't the same type of notion of God that typical Christians would prescribe. Your notion of God is
what typical Christians?
Yeah, typically when I talk to Christians, they say that they believe in all-knowing.
About Cardinal Newman, who defined God as conscience. He's a major influence on all of Catholic social theory. How about that Christian?
Sure. So do you believe in the all-knowing, all-powerful, all-good notion of God?
What do you mean by believe?
Do you think it to be true?
That's a circular definition. What do you mean when you say you believe?
How is that circular?
Because you added no content to the answer by substituting the word true and believe.
I said you think it to be true.
All right. So if you believe something, you stake your life on it.
Danny.
Yeah.
Isn't this like the worst performance from Peterson on the whole thing, maybe?
Yeah, I think this is the worst segment of the entire segment. I think what we're about to review after is even worse than what we're about to talk about with the belief thing. But I'll be brief, because you'll have probably a lot to say about the belief stuff. Parker said, most of the time, this is what Christians say. And what Peterson said, well, what about this one guy? Did y'all catch that? I mean, okay. I mean, Parker could have said, okay, but I said most, right? You're going to find Christians that say crazy things or say things outside the box, right? But I just don't understand why Peterson thought that there was some kind of response. It's like he wanted to flex that he knew that, this guy that didn't take a kind of typical conception of God. But yeah, what was he doing there?
He's just wrong. I mean, he's just completely wrong about this. It's again the same thing I was talking about before. It's another instance of the Peterson fallacy, right? Because I encourage the audience who, certainly if you're in any way skeptical of what I'm saying and you think Peterson knows what he's talking about, just Google it. Just Google Cardinal Newman, conscience, God, stuff like that, those kind of keywords. Try and find out what he said, because it's published stuff. Cardinal Newman, it was from the 19th century, so it's old. You can read all of his stuff for free. There's numerous letters and things where he explains what he's talking about. You find loads and loads of content you can dip into if you really want to. It's not difficult, free, easy to find on your smartphone, whatever. No real excuse if you're curious about this and don't bother checking out. It's very easy to do, and you'll find places where he famously talks about the idea that what conscience is, right? This kind of moral sense that you have that tells you that something's right or wrong, that you should go and do this and help this person or not do this, blah, blah, blah. That is the voice of God talking to you, right? And actually, I think this is what Jung thought as well. Jung famously said that he knew God. And by that, I think it's really hard to really know what Jung means by anything, but I think he felt like the conscience was this kind of collective unconscious connecting to him and directing him in certain ways. And Newman just thinks that's God doing that, right? So Newman may have, although I haven't read everything he's written all the way in long shot, but he may have said something like, the voice in my head that tells me right from wrong, that's God, right? And maybe you could sort of see, maybe this is what Peterson's done, is he's read that and gone, oh, it's a definition of God, right? He's gone, that is God. Right? Is means identity. That's two sides of, two terms flanking an identity. It's a definition. That's what I've got here. But it's not, because it's like if my phone rings and I pick it up and go, oh, that's my mum. I'm not saying my mum's a ringtone, right? That's the type of misunderstanding that's going on, right? like Newman doesn't say, he certainly doesn't give a definition of God as God being conscience. And because think about the implications of that. Cardinal Newman, you're cardinal. Do you think he's saying that God is just a voice in my head, just part of my own psychology or something? He clearly is committed to the Catholic doctrines. God is the creator of the universe, the Almighty, the Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost died for our sins, blah, blah, blah. He's committed to all of those things. So obviously, he isn't going to take this like ultra kind of idiosyncratic view, the like kind of Jungian view or whatever, which is that God is kind of like a voice in my head, part of my own psyche or collective unconscious, or connecting it to anything like that. So he's just maybe confused, maybe cherry picking, maybe somebody has given him a perspective, maybe he didn't actually read Newman, maybe he read somebody else telling him about Newman. I have no idea, but this is like, it's flatly wrong. And I watched Danny talking to Trent Doherty on Capturing Christianity the other day, and Doherty there really likes Peterson and didn't want to commit to him being wrong in any way, and really squirmed when you were pressing him about whether he'd made a mistake or stuff. But even then, he was like, "This is not."
Just give it a bit of context, Alex, because not everyone knows who Trent Doherty is. He's why don't you explain?
So this channel,
Danny, tell the story. What happened there?
Okay, very briefly, because Trent Doherty was a philosopher at Baylor, and he left. Now he does other things, but he used to publish a lot. So he has a doctorate degree in philosophy, but he's a big fan of Jordan Peterson, and he tried to defend his performance. In fact, calling his performance brilliant. Right. So when it came to, I reviewed this clip with him where he accused Parker of a circular definition when it clearly wasn't circular, and he tried to defend that. Or it wasn't even clear. Like at first he sounded like he wasn't making a mistake, and then he was. And I think that's what Alex is referring to.
Yeah, no, I think that Trent, when pushed on it and being clear, he was like, this is an embarrassing way of describing what Newman would say, and no Newman scholar would agree with this. And it's easy to see why if you just do a cursory Google search, that's not what he's saying. So that's just on the side note of like, did Newman say that? No, he obviously didn't, and it's an instance of the Peterson fallacy again. And then just very quickly, because we talked about this already, but this is where he says it the most explicitly, was about like believing in something means that you would die for it or whatever. And it's clearly like appealing to a different notion of belief, right? When we say, I believe that 2 + 2 = 4 or something, I'm not committing my life in any way. I'm not going to die for anything. It doesn't mean anything like that. It just means something along the lines of my attitude. Like if you write the proposition on the chalkboard, and then you say, hands up if you think this is true, I'm going to be one of the guys with his hands up, right? Something like that. I assent to it. I believe in it. I think it's true, which is what Parker said. And you go, oh, that's a circular definition, right? Circular definition is I want to hit myself in the head with a piece of wood. What do you mean circular definition? A good definition offers a synonym. Is that wrong? And then he was like complaining because he's going like, like if I say a bachelor, what's a bachelor? It's a married man, right? Well, it's a synonym. It doesn't really give you anything beyond the original meaning. Of course, that's why, because it's if and only if.
Actually, it's not a married.
What did I say? A married man.
I think you said married.
I may have said that, but you know what I mean, right? If a bachelor is an unmarried man, it's obviously like what I'm trying to say. Like you offer a synonym, right? It has the same meaning. But his complaint was, well, when you gave the understanding of belief, meaning to take it to be true, you didn't offer any more content than the original thing. Well, yeah, that's because it's a definition. It should be saying the same thing. If it offered more, if it was like, oh, what's the definition of a bachelor? Oh, it's a married man under the age of 30. Well, no. Now I'm adding more in.
I mean, unmarried.
A good definition.
It's definitely unmarried.
I'm married again.
You have.
You know what I mean? My point is that like if I give you more meaning than in the first term, when I'm giving you the definiens, the thing that the definiens is the thing I'm defining. The definition is the thing I'm offering as characterizing that thing, right? If they're different from each other, if one of them has more content to it than the other one, it's not a definition, right? They have to match one another for it to be a definition. It has to be like this thing, if and only if that thing. So his complaint was, you didn't give me a new term that had more content in it than the original. But that wouldn't be a definition if you did that. Right? What he did was perfectly fine. Might not be informative if you don't understand the second thing that he's giving you, right? If like I say, well, I don't know what it means to be an unmarried man. Okay, great. Well, now I need to find another synonym in order to help you because you don't know what that term means either. But it doesn't mean that the thing that was offered was wrong or inaccurate or that he'd made a mistake or anything. It's fine. And that just is the normal, straightforward notion. And very last thing, because obviously I'm holding this in. I've been watching fucking loads of Jordan Peterson this week, and I need to get it all out of my system. It's kind of cathartic sort of output. So bear with me on this one. But
I read his book. Just think I've got out his stuff.
yeah, I put
I don't
that
know how
down
to do
on
that.
a couple of pages.
I couldn't open his book. But
Right. But then, so the last thing on this is just sort of like, okay, he's saying believing means like being prepared to die for it or something, and I think, and you know, maybe I'm wrong about this, but I think this still goes back to his addiction studies, therapy, kind of AA style idea that like you're a better person if you commit to something to a really strong degree. So like believing in something. Like, so I'm going to contrast believing in, which is like I don't know, say some people like I'm a conservative and then they'll live their whole life, you know, going to rallies and, you know, take a bullet for Trump or something. They believe in conservatism, right? Whereas simply believing that, you know, 2 + 2 = 4 is just assenting to, right? And one of them is like you're dying for, that thing that Peterson's talking about. And the other one is just the kind of assenting that a proposition is true or false, which is what this is Parker, right? Who's talking to him at this point. Parker
Yes,
saying that I just think it's, you know, true, like as in this pencil is green or something, right? Now the thing is, you can distinguish those two things from one another if you want to, because they obviously are different. But like normally when you're distinguishing in philosophy, it's kind of Aristotelian notion of what a distinction is. You say like, on the one hand, yes, on the other hand, no, right? And that's a way of like trying to clarify, because you're saying like, did I go to the bank? Well, I didn't go to the riverbank, but I did go to the place where the money is kept, right? That's helping you understand in case you were tempted to think I was talking about the riverbank. Let me distinguish the two and tell you that that's not the one I mean, right? That's what you would do normally to make a distinction to aid the person who you're talking to. Whereas Peterson just makes a distinction. He goes, what do you mean by believe? And then doesn't that help them in any way? It's like neither of them. So imagine this like interaction where if I say, someone says to me, oh, you look gay. And I go, sorry, do you mean that I look homosexual? And they say, no. I say, so you're saying that I look happy? And they say, no. It's just like, what? Now the distinction isn't doing any work anymore, right? Like it's sort of pointless to introduce it in the first place. So, and it's like over here where he's saying, what do you mean believe? But presumably you think he's taking one of those meanings, but not the other one, right? Like he's going, well, when I say believe, I believe in God, I mean that I would die for Christianity or something. But the problem with that is that like, even if that was true, you'd think, I'm not going to believe in Christianity like that, like believe in, unless I also assent to the proposition that Christianity is true. Like it'd be weird to think, I think the proposition is false, right? In that standard assent mode, but I also believe in it in the full sense. So it seems like what he was trying to say was, I believe in Christianity. But my supposition is that entails that you then assent that the proposition is true. Because I don't understand. So it seems to me that he was making this distinction, but when you try and understand what that means, the distinction he's making wouldn't really, like he'd be saying, well, I believe in, but believing in means that you do, in fact, believe it. So you may as well have just said, yes, I believe in it, right? And not introduce a distinction in the first place. So it was just obfuscation. It wasn't clarification. And it seems to me just the biggest point of this. This is it's like a Peterson dodge or something, where you just like kick sand up in the air and hope that you get like sand in your eye and don't know how to continue. It's not actually trying to do anything. So it was sort of a dominance play to just be in charge of the conversation, right? And be the big man. I was actually just thinking what was going on with 90% of this was just he wanted to be the big man in the room. And so when people were asking questions he couldn't answer, he just like kicked up sand until he was on top of them, like a wrestling match or something. And that's all that was going on.
I mean, there's also
it was a big run on Shalman.
There's something that this brings to my mind. A big part of his shtick here is that he wants to say that atheists are somehow religious, even though they don't want to admit to it, right? They worship things or something that they take to be God, but they don't want to say that they've taken anything to be God, and they don't want to say they worship and so on and so forth. What if there's just someone for whom there's nothing that they'd be willing to die for? Well, then his argument wouldn't go through. As long as there's one person like that, then this whole shtick fails, right?
Like, you're like in like Nazi Germany, and it is the case that there's like Jewish people in your attic, and you're trying to protect them. Would you lie to like the Nazis?
I would have done everything I bloody well could, so I wouldn't be in that situation to begin with. It's a hypothetical, and it's not answerable. Just told you
Hypothetical.
I would do everything that I could to make sure that I'm never in that situation. By the time you've got there, you've made so many mistakes that there's nothing you can do that isn't a sin.
Danny.
Okay, before
Okay.
we get, I'll try to be brief. But by the way, when he realizes that he didn't offer a secular definition, I love how Peterson just kind of plowed right to the next thing. Like, didn't apologize for accusing him for an uninformative definition. Didn't say that he was wrong there. He just kept on going like that. It never happened. That was crazy. Because if I did that, I'd be like, oh yeah, you're right. My bad. You weren't. That's fine. Let's move on. Right. He didn't do that. But now going to this, there's a lot of things that happen here, but here's what I'll say. What Peterson says here at the end is that basically, you have to be such an evil, sinful person to find yourself in a situation where you would have to lie to save another, protect another. So Harriet Tubman, that probably deceived many racist people, slave owners, to help runaway slaves. She must have been steeped in sin, right? Oscar Schindler, right? Thousands of people probably. I guess he was a vicious person. According to
Moses as well. Moses,
right? Like almost, yeah, just like all these people that we would deem as virtuous. On Peterson's view, he's committed to saying that they're not. They were steeped in sin, and that's why they had to make the decisions they made.
Yeah, just watch the Disney TV show about the Van Pelt family hiding Anne Frank. It's really moving. And he has to say, oh my God, look at these guys, steeped in sin. It's absurd. Dan.
Yeah, I mean, it's absurd that he won't answer hypothetical, right? Like, clearly the only reason he's pulling that sophistical move is because he knows that he's not going to have a particularly good reply, right? It's going to break his case for him, so he won't answer the question. And earlier in the evening, he not only would answer hypotheticals, but he would pose them. So and yet now it's inappropriate to be posing a hypothetical. It's such a bizarre.
He felt like a lot of politicians would say, I won't answer hypotheticals. Like, if you're going to run the government, shouldn't you be thinking hypothetically, like thinking forward? I mean, what?
Well, it's also, if you have some sort of scientific theory, which I take it that Peterson thinks of himself that he has such things, then part of the job of those theories is to be able to answer hypotheticals, right? Like, that's in philosophy of science. The way that we would say this is that scientific theories, among other things, have to be able to support counterfactuals, and if they can't do that, then they're not really fulfilling the job of a theory. He has to be able to say, oh, well, if I had a patient who came into my office and they were saying these kinds of things, these are the kinds of things I would say in response to them. That's a hypothetical.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the problem is, like, I think what's going on here is it's showing that Peterson is, and I'm not saying this in a gatekeepy way, right? Like, for instance, Danny did a bit of philosophy, like a PhD, like as a published guy. And I'm not like I'm going to say, well, I won't talk to Danny, I won't take him seriously, whatever. I've talked to loads and loads of people about philosophy from all different types of backgrounds. Me and my wife used to work for a thing that did philosophy for like people who were drug addicts who were recovering, trying to get back into whatever. Anyway, no, I'm not virtue signaling in any way. My point here is just simply that, like, Peterson's not a philosopher. I just wanted to, like, I'm not gatekeeper, I'm not trying to be a dick about it or anything, but, like, and this is just one of the things, one of the areas that really comes out, like, the relevant area of philosophy for this discussion about Christians versus atheists is philosophy of religion. And Peterson isn't well versed on that. Like, I think it's clear, right? Peterson wouldn't be able to describe to you the premises of, like, Rowe's evidential argument for the problem of evil. He couldn't give you Plantinga's modal ontological argument. He doesn't know what the free will defense is. None of this stuff. It's just all. He's not an expert in that field. He's an expert in a different field. It might be a neighboring one, but he's not really a native expert in this. And here is we can see this, and it might not be evident from the outside if you've not studied this very well, but this is just a straightforward thought experiment. The point is supposed to be like, if you're a deontologist, like, this is like Kant's perspective, where you should commit to there being kind of exceptionless moral rules, that apply in all places at all times, a categorical imperative, the way he would describe it. So like, and he thought lying was one, or he kind of did whatever. This is supposed to be a thought experiment. It's tricky if you're a deontologist, like committed to never being a circumstance in which you should lie, because it kind of tilts the intuition pump kind of weighing scales towards the contrary view, which is a kind of consequentialism or whatever, where what really matters is what's going to happen if I do this. It's not like, is this an instance of this type? But it's like, regardless of what type of action it is, it's like, is it going to lead to people suffering or whatever? And the consequences are what matters. And it's just so easy to just be able to say, sure, just reach towards consequentialism. It's not a big deal. It's not a gotcha or something. You're just going to say, yeah, promising or lying or whatever, being honest, isn't an exceptionless mandate that I have to uphold at all times in every circumstance, right? Actually, adhering to that view is quite an extreme position to take. And it would have been so easy for Peterson to just go, sure, whatever, I would have lied. Consequentialism, at least in some circumstances, to some extent, is sometimes the right way to go with this thing, right? I.e., if he had a practical ethics and any idea of what his practical ethics would be, he would have been able to say that. And I think the thing about philosophy of religion and being a practitioner of that isn't so much that you have a particular domain of expertise. I mean, I guess it's the types of arguments that we talk about on this program a lot, but like the point is, you have to have quite a broad, and not necessarily that deep, but quite a broad range of knowledge about all the different parts of philosophy, because they can all come up when you're talking about religious arguments or whatever. So you find most of the time that these people are scrapping in the Discord servers or whatever, they'll know the stuff about philosophy of science, some stuff about philosophy of mind, ethics, meta-ethics, blah, blah, blah. They'll have some kind of idea of what those things are, because any of them could be marshaled in these fist fights about philosophy of religion that go on. And Peterson's just not in that game. He's not a player in that. He doesn't have an idea about it. He's just used to pontificating with nobody objecting to him on anything he wants to without any consequences. And this is what was great about this was that he's being exposed, right, in front of people who just go, well, hold on, what about this? And he just had nothing to say about this easy thought experiment. I mean, it should have been an easy thing for him to step over, but because he didn't get it, because he's so out of place, he got stuck on this. And then he has to resort to this increasingly absurd things like, I wouldn't be in that situation, and that the people who are in that situation have brought it upon themselves. And that's fucking ridiculous, right? It's not their fault if your government goes totalitarian and starts killing people. It's not your moral failing if that happens. And if you're doing a good thing and helping people, clearly you can't blame that person, which is exactly what you're saying, Danny, by listing these people like Oscar Schindler or something. He's just flipping the moral scales upside down just so he doesn't have to answer a very relatively easy question about practical ethics. It's kind of ridiculous, really.
Actually, something that just came to my mind was I've got another show on YouTube called Philosopher and a Child. We've released one episode. It's been very popular. And in a later episode that we're going to release, the same child, Cara, is posed, the trolley problem is posed to her. And she never says anything as stupid as, I wouldn't be in that situation. She just, no. I think she's 9 or 10 years old now. I was out with her last weekend, so she probably know. But anyway, clearly, child better than Jordan Peterson on this topic. But let's go on to the last clip.
My final claim is that atheists accept Christian morality, but deny the religion's foundational stories.
In people as property, he says that you can beat them with a rod too. He commands genocide in Deuteronomy, in Numbers, and in Samuel. I mean, they have a goddamn baby barbecue in Numbers. Is all of this in line with Christian ethics?
No, the biblical library is a continuing story, and everything written in it has to be contextualized by the entire text. There's 65,000 hyperlinks in the biblical text. And you can take pieces of it out of context and criticize them, and that's what you're doing. But
3, God says, go and slaughter the Amalekites, slaughter the men, the women, the children, the infants. What's the justification for that? Is that in line
That's a
with
good
Christian
question.
ethic?
That's a good question. I don't really know what to do with the terrible, blood-soaked, saturated history of the human past. I don't know. And I don't think anybody knows. I mean, what you try to do in your own life, as far as I can tell, is to conduct yourself in a manner that makes such things much more unlikely.
This one, it's God saying, go and do this atrocity.
Do you think that there's ever such a thing as a righteous war? There's a directional morality that emerges across time, that has its roots in the Old Testament, for example, with its restrictions against murder specifically, that makes itself manifest in the Christian texts as the insistence on voluntary self-sacrifice as the foundational belief. That's a profoundly anti-violence ethos.
Actually, before I throw it over to the panel, I just want two quick points. One, pet peeve, when the slaughter of the Amalekites is mentioned, too many atheists never mention the animals are also killed, and that's an obsession with mine. But that is very important because he goes just war, and that relates to the bigger theme, I think, because one of Peterson's main ideas is that if we do this or that and we give up God, then we end up in a totalitarian state. And what you see right there is he references this genocide as, oh, could it be a just war? So basically he's saying that genocide could be just, and I think that's where his philosophy leads him, exactly the place where he thinks our philosophy is going to lead. No, it's your philosophy is going to lead there. But anyway, Danny.
Yeah. So two things. One about the prompt. I don't really know what he means by, I don't know what Christian morality is. It seems like there are values that Christians take seriously, but they're not like in principle ones that are only held by Christians. And it seems like a lot of these, like the golden rule, pre-existed Christianity. I believe, Plato and Aristotle had versions of that. So I was unclear about, what he means by, I'm fine to say that Jesus stressed some stuff, right, over, what Greek and Roman pagans, right? I'm fine to say that. But I wanted to, again, this goes back to my view that these prompts suck. And also I want to point out a weird reversal. A lot of the questions that Peterson was asked, a lot of Christians would have no problem answering, like one that I asked him, that whether he was Christian. But usually when I ask this question to Christians, right, they don't answer this one, but look how he directly answered the one question that most Christians squirm on, he answered very directly. No, it's not compatible. But I wish there was some time to, that should be a problem for him. It's like he's considering it not a problem. And I'm not so sure how he doesn't see the problem. I said there was two things, but there was a third thing. Oh, the whole out of context thing. You would think you know better by now, to where if you're saying this is out of context, explain how it's out of context. But he just says it's out of context and then just moves on. Like, why should anyone accept that what Ian said was out of context? Like, that was annoying. So yeah, that's my take on this clip.
Alex?
Yeah, I definitely agree with the out of context thing. Unless you're literally reading the whole Bible from start to finish, then anything you quote from the Bible will be out of context in a certain sense, right? So like you will never allowed to talk about a specific passage from the Bible or something. I mean, he said that Elijah defines God as conscience, right? And I was looking up the reference for that earlier, and so it seemed to me that there was a throwaway line, where it was like one thing, and God appeared to them as a whisper on the wind or something.
Yeah,
like
it's Kings. I think it's Kings 19.
That's right.
Where he says, after the earthquake came a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire came a gentle whisper. And literally, I think that is the reference.
Yeah. And like reconstructing that as being a definition of God as conscience certainly must be an example of taking it out of context. But it's massively flooding that sentence with meaning that's not there when you just read it amongst it. Anyway, what was the contention here? That atheists accept Christian morality but don't agree with the biblical stories anymore. Right, yeah. Right. So that's
isn't that his position?
It is his position. He doesn't agree with the stories either. He's not taken literally. It's bizarre because, so suppose someone had a very similar thesis. They were like, oh, the atheists believe in Christian science, but don't believe in the Christian stories. And then you ask them, what do you mean by Christian science? Well, I mean, Isaac Newton discovered gravity. He was a Christian. It's like, great, yes, I agree with some of the things that Christians have come up with. That has nothing to do with anything. But it's a bit worse than that too, because in philosophy of science, there's a distinction between the context of discovery and the context of justification. So the people often bring up this story. It's probably not a true story, but supposedly when Kekule discovered the structure of the benzene molecule, the benzene ring, he had dreamed about a snake that was biting its own tail, Ouroboros. And the idea is supposed to be that if things might lead you to make a discovery that don't actually justify the conclusion you come to. But what matters is that at some point, someone is able to show, oh, actually, we do have good justification for that. There's this long, complicated history that people may have been led there for non-rational reasons, but now we can see the rational reason for it. Someone could say precisely the same thing about ethics. I can imagine a Kantian who says this, who says, look, historically, people came up with the golden rule. Perhaps it was ancient Israelites that were the first people to think of this principle. But now we have a more sophisticated version of the principle in the form of the categorical imperative. And there's a good rational justification, so says the Kantian, for that principle. And that justification doesn't have to invoke God. So that, I don't understand why someone couldn't just say precisely that. There's this move that some apologists like to make. We saw it with John Lennox, and it's certainly that apparently Jordan Peterson does as well, where just because some person historically came up with something who happened to be part of a religion, that then the religion is credited with what they came up with. And the actual story is much more complicated than that.
And one very last point, whilst I can remember what I'm trying to say, is his claim was that the atheists accept Christian morality. And obviously there's a question mark about, hold on, what do you mean Christian morality? And I suppose the natural choice of example given by the atheists was to go to the moral horrors from the Old Testament, Amalekites, etc., etc. But I think it's, aren't there also just sort of trivial examples Old Testament ones are easy to come up with, eating shellfish or mixed fabrics and stuff. Those were just as much commands. They were rules that you have to obey. And obviously atheists don't follow those. They're not interested in those. And you might say, well, these are just the Old Testament or something. But if you just think about the 10 Commandments, which is an Old Testament book, central, and then you'd think that it would be part of Judeo-Christian values, is what he called it. So 10 Commandments must be slap bang in the middle of it. And 5 of them have got nothing to do with, it's just worshipping one God before all others, right? Taking the Lord's name.
Graven image.
Graven image, exactly. Obviously, we don't accept any of those things. So what's the claim? It can't be that all, even the central bullet, middle of the bullseye thing, we don't even accept all of that. So half of it we don't accept. So what he must mean, and trivially so, obviously, it doesn't even apply in an atheist world. It's not even we're disagreeing with something. It's just, if I don't believe that God exists, I'm not going to be worrying about taking his name in vain, because obviously that doesn't even make any sense. So that's obvious that we don't accept all of Christian ethics. So what does he mean? Some. So, but then it becomes way less interesting, because what are you saying? That you would expect that just take 2 populations completely independent of one another and they come up with moral values. I mean, is it that surprising that some of them overlap? No. Especially now when you say, well, actually, these 2 pools are not independent at all. They've grown up together in the same planet and over the same period of time in the same communities as one another. The fact that there's some overlap with each other, it's not even interesting. I mean, who cares about that? So his claim just turns into we have some overlap in our moral values, not interesting, and we don't, atheists don't agree in the biblical stories. Obvious. Not interesting and obvious. Those are the 2 things. There's nothing even to disagree with. It's just he wanted it to be rage bait, but it was just sort of shoulder shruggy. That's how I would describe it.
Also, I've heard some people say, oh, well, you can give the Old Testament examples, but hey, we're Christians, we've got a different outlook. But in Christianity, the worst crime that you can make, the only unforgivable sin, is blasphemy against the Holy Spirit.
Yeah, right.
Is Jordan Peterson really saying that we accept that as the worst possible? I kind of go with genocide.
And what's the greatest command? The greatest command is to love God.
Yeah. Right.
So the worst and the best is both deeply theological, something that we're not going to sign off on.
Right. All right. Well, we should probably leave it there. I hope you've enjoyed this discussion. Thank you so much, Danny. I know everyone is pressing you to be on their show, so we really appreciate coming on ours.
We're the number one. Don't worry. I was excited to come here.
Oh, that's really, really kind of you. Well, if you like this content, give us a like on YouTube. If you have any thoughts, leave them in the comments, and subscribe to the channel. And we will see you next time on the SciPhi Show.